All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a legal case that is, frankly, incredibly complex and seemingly bizarre on the surface. But we aren't just looking at the law here. We're looking at the hidden engine driving it all, human motivation. By analyzing source documents and psychological assessments, we're going to uncover what really happens in the human brain during high-stakes clashes.
We're going to explore what is really the core mystery presented in these case files. How exactly does an independent scholar's casual social media habit, literally just saving and retweeting articles online, result in a severe criminal sentence? It's a massive, counterintuitive leap, right? To wrap our heads around how we get from point A to point B, we really need to look at the timeline.
Looking at this timeline, you can see a truly shocking escalation. So for 3 whole years, from 2019 to 2022, Dr. Chen Yuan engaged in this completely mundane online habit, just reading and retweeting. But then, September 2022 hits, and his home is raided by over 10 police officers. Seriously, 10 officers! Just think about that for a second. Fast forward to October, he's formally arrested, and by April 2023, he's sentenced to 20 months in prison for, quote, picking quarrels and provoking trouble. So how on earth does a quiet, everyday academic routine trigger a major criminal prosecution?
Well, check out this key data point. Dr. Chen had fewer than 100 followers on his account. And honestly, most of those were entirely inactive. The source analysis actually shows his real-world network impact was virtually zero. We're talking no virality, no massive audience, literally no measurable public disruption at all. So if his external impact was effectively a digital ghost town, what was actually driving his behavior? And why in the world did authorities react with such intense force?
Part 1. The scholar's intrinsic motivation, understanding the drive for knowledge. To impartially understand how this whole legal collision happened, we first have to look inside the scholar's mind. The analysis here relies heavily on something called self-determination theory, or SDT. Basically, it argues that human motivation is fueled by 3 innate needs. You've got autonomy, which is, steering your own ship, competence, which is mastering a skill, and relatedness, connecting with others. Now, the documents reveal that Dr. Chen was driven by intense intrinsic motivation. It's kind of like reading a massive, complex encyclopedia just because you genuinely love learning, right? Not because you're getting paid or looking to be famous.
When you look at the psychological profiles derived from the files, they reveal a classic academic mind. He had really high epistemic motivation, basically a relentless drive to seek the truth and figure out complex systems. He also prioritized a mastery goal orientation. That just means he cared way more about growing his own brain and capabilities than, say, getting external validation or public applause. And crucially, he had a low need for cognitive closure. He didn't need quick, black-and-white answers. He was perfectly comfortable collecting all these diverse, sometimes totally contradictory viewpoints just to slowly understand the world. This is pure autonomy in action, operating entirely independently of any external rewards or political pressures.
And actually, in his own defense, Chen explicitly stated this exact identity. He viewed his actions not as some kind of public broadcast meant to sway the masses, but really as a deeply personal, inward-facing intellectual journey. He was essentially curating a digital library for his own mind. It's pretty much the ultimate expression of that intrinsic motivation we were just talking about.
Part 2. The system's extrinsic motivation, the drive for control and risk aversion.
Okay, so now let's flip the script and look at the authorities. Psychological analysis suggests they were operating under very strict external pressures. We're talking highly extrinsic motivation here. They operated with what's called performance avoidance goals. In everyday terms, their main focus was basically covering their bases so they wouldn't get punished by higher-ups or make some kind of career-ending mistake. And unlike our scholar, they had a very high need for cognitive closure. They demanded rapid, definitive answers to maintain order and group consensus, rather than going on a nuanced search for objective truth. For them, power and affiliation were the real driving forces.
Which brings us to this absolutely startling quote from the case files. It's allegedly from an investigating prosecutor, and it brilliantly illustrates this idea of instrumental motivation. The quote reads, "Upper-level leaders gave special instructions to make this an ironclad case. He must be put to death." Wow. This really shows us a system where actions aren't necessarily dictated by truth or justice, right? Instead, they're dictated by absolute obedience to external, hierarchical directives.
Part 3. A clash of motivations, when intrinsic exploration meets extrinsic control.
So as you can probably see, this wasn't merely a dispute over the facts, it was a profound structural mismatch. Over on the left, you've got the intrinsically motivated scholar seeking accuracy, learning, and mastery. But on the right, you have the extrinsically motivated system, seeking specific directional outcomes and, desperately avoiding performance failures. They were literally operating on two completely incompatible motivational operating systems.
The contrast in their approaches is just stark. The scholar's primary goal was meaning. The system's was order. The scholar used deep analytical processing, what psychologists call System 2 thinking, the kind that is slow, deliberate, and logical. The system, on the other hand, relied on quick reactionary labeling. That's System 1 thinking, fast, instinctive, and emotional. Where the scholar was driven by curiosity and wanted rational dialogue, the system was driven by fear, obedience, and authority directives. They literally weren't even speaking the same psychological language.
Part 4. The Psychology of Misjudgment, How the System Rationalized the Conviction.
So how exactly did the system legally and psychologically rationalize punishing such a benign action? Well, the source documents point to a classic cognitive bias, the fundamental attribution error. This happens when we overemphasize someone's perceived malicious intent while completely ignoring their situational context. It's kind of like assuming someone cut you off in traffic because they're just purely evil, right? You ignore the fact that they might actually be rushing a loved one to the hospital. The system entirely misread the scholar's intentions by falling headfirst into this exact psychological trap. And here is exactly how that error played out, step by step. First, they observed a simple action, a retweet. Second, they instantly presumed that a severe social disruption must have occurred as a result. Third, and honestly, this is the really dangerous part, they reverse-engineered a malicious motive just to perfectly fit their own presumption. Finally, they completely ignored his actual context, the fact that he was just an isolated academic curating research material for himself. The case files also reveal a pretty shocking irony here. The court actually weaponized his PhD against him by explicitly stating that his high level of education meant he, quote, must have known he was causing chaos. They neatly bypassed the whole need to prove any actual malicious intent. This is a textbook example of motivational misattribution. They're projecting a destructive, systemic motive onto a person's actual drive was purely cognitive.
Dr. Chen, drawing on his own deep expertise in nonlinear complex systems, actually tried to point out the scientific flaw in this reasoning. He argued it is mathematically impossible for a tiny isolated edge node, like an account with less than 100 followers, to trigger a systemic network cascade. As he so perfectly put it, claiming he severely disrupted society is like claiming a single human breath disrupts the Earth's entire atmosphere. But unfortunately, logic driven by a desire for accuracy falls on completely deaf ears when it's speaking to a system driven by a rigid desire for directional control.
Part 5. The Aftermath, Defiance, and the Historical Record.
So despite facing overwhelming systemic pressure, Dr. Chen's intrinsic motivation remained incredibly resilient. While he was in jail, he drafted a meticulous, defiant defense, which the documents actually refer to as a blood letter. Now, from a psychological standpoint, he didn't write this expecting to win his immediate release. No, he was driven by what we call transcendent motivation. It's a lot like Viktor Frankl's concepts of finding profound meaning in extreme adversity. Chen converted his trauma into a historical document, leaving a rational record for future generations. His motivation quite literally transcended his physical confinement.
We're going to leave you with this final thought today. When a legal system's extrinsic need for control blindly punishes the intrinsic human drive to learn and explore, what is the ultimate cost to societal progress? It's a really profound question about how our institutions interact with the very curiosity that drives human knowledge forward. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we hope this breakdown has given you a much deeper understanding of the hidden psychological dynamics at play here.